Welcome everyone. I'm Andrew Stuck. I'm one of the co-producers of Walk, Listen, Create. I think most people know who we are, but if you don't, we're a not-for-profit. We're registered in Belgium. We're part of an EU-funded project called Walking Arts and Local Communities. We've been running cafes now since before COVID. As you can tell, they're kind of smaller, intimate group where the audience is probably people who have a similar interest and practice to our guest. And our guest is someone who was recommended to us by someone who should be in the room, but he's actually performing at a gig, and that's Quentin Budworth. So I'd like to hats off to Quentin for recommending Jenny Sturgeon. What I'm about to do is I'm about to read you Jenny's biography, which she wrote on Walk, Listen, Create. She writes, I'm a Scottish singer-songwriter, multi-instrumentalist and sound artist. As a solo artist, I've released 2 acclaimed albums. My music combines field recordings with sonic and lyrical imagery, which is bound together by common threads of nature, folklore, and the connection of people have with the landscape. My most recent album, Paths Made Walking, is a series of 33 located sound recordings made whilst walking the Scottish National Trail. So Jenny, it's over to you.
Hello. What an amazing thing to be in this space with you all over the globe. So thank you so much for tuning in, especially those of you who it's very late at night or very early in the morning. I was delighted to get an email from Andrew and the team asking me to be part of this. So yeah, I'm just going to talk a bit about my practice, give you a bit of a background on what I do, and talk to you about the walk as well, the Scottish National Trail. As Andrew said, interrupt me at any point. I'll try and keep an eye out if anyone raises a hand in the. I think there's a function there to raise a hand, but also if you just wave, I hopefully will be able to see, or unmute yourselves and holler, and I will happily answer questions. That's great. Yeah. So as Andrew said, I'm a musician, and well, I used to be an ecologist, which kind of helps make sense of everything I feel like I've done since moving into music. So I studied seabird ecology and did a PhD at Aberdeen University in seabird ecology, and then decided that academia wasn't really for me. And I was doing a lot of music alongside the science, and decided that that was a lot more fun, and that I was able to talk about all of the things that I am a big geek about with science, but through music, and that I found it easier to connect with people in that way. I would have conversations, and I still do have conversations, mostly about birds actually, Jeff, after gigs. And the first job I got, I suppose, after finishing my PhD and going into music was to go out to an island called St Kilda off the west coast of Scotland to do some seabird work, but also I was commissioned to write an EP of music to celebrate those islands. And I took out a very rudimentary recording device and recorded some St Kilda wrens and some storm petrels. And I just absolutely loved working with these field recordings. And so from that point, I've been using located sound within my practice, and whether that's inspiration for song lyrics or melodies, and have created a few different live performances specifically about using located sound. One of them called Northern Flyway, which was all about bird migration, and my most recent project, which was The Living Mountain, all about the Cairngorms National Park, which is close to where I grew up. And The Living Mountain is the name of a book written by an author called Nan Shepherd. It's a wonderful book. I highly recommend getting hold of it, especially as I'm assuming you all, like me, enjoy walking. And it's possibly, well, it was reviewed as the finest book on nature writing in the world. And yeah, that was the inspiration for my last sort of musical album. And then I suppose it was during COVID time that I realized it was possible to take time out of work, and that all of the work wouldn't disappear. So taking a bit of a break And so at that point, I put some time aside in my diary to go and do something. And I thought the something was probably going to be going for a walk. So 2 years before going on this walk, I put the time aside, and it was about 6 months before starting the walk in May 2023 that I was starting to research where I maybe wanted to go. And I've always been I've always enjoyed walking, but I previously never done a long distance walk, nothing more than a couple of days, and usually I'd done that with somebody else. So this was very much like I wanted to sort of challenge myself and see what was possible, with very much thinking that I might just manage 2 days and then decide to hop on a bus and go home. And home for me is up in Shetland, which is in the very far north of Scotland, off the north coast, and then keep going, and then keep going, and there's a selection of islands there. But I'm originally from Aberdeenshire. Yeah, so I thought I'm going to show you some pictures from the walk, and it's starting off with a bit of a map of the walk, and talk to you about the recording equipment that I used, and a bit about the motivation behind it. And that's something I thought it would be really interesting that we could have a discussion as well about, is the motivation behind why we walk, because that was something that kept coming up in conversation quite a lot while I was on this walk, bumping into people who were doing their own long distance walks, or were out for the day, or were on their bikes, or whatever, the sort of motivation of why we do these things. So that would be really interesting to have a discussion around that a bit later on. But I'm going to share my screen and some of these images, and we'll just see how far we get through them. It's pictures from the walk, and at various points we will go away, as Andrew said, and have a little bit of a listen to some of these recordings. So I'll just make this full screen, so hopefully you can all see that. This is just a screenshot from online of the Scottish National Trail. So it goes from the southeast of Scotland, zigzagging all the way to the very northwest of Scotland's mainland. And being an islander now, I'm always very conscious to say Scotland's mainland, because a lot of people would refer to it as just a walk through Scotland, but I'm conscious that it's not, because it doesn't include my island that I live on. So the Scottish National Trail was devised by a writer and walker, Cameron McNeish, and it's an 864 kilometre trail through Scotland. And it's a non-official walking route, but it joins up lots of different walking routes. So ones that are quite famous, like the West Highland Way, the John Muir Way, the St Cuthbert's Way, and it does little bits of those all the way up to the Cape Wrath Trail, which is kind of the last third of the walk, really. So the bit that's on the far west, that's all of the Cape Wrath Trail. And when I was looking at wanting to go for a walk, I thought maybe I would want to go and do something abroad, but then was looking on the Walk Highlands website, which is a fantastic resource for walking in Scotland. And I scrolled down through all the long distance walks until I got to the bottom, and there was the Scottish National Trail, and I thought, oh, that looks interesting, and started researching it then, and decided that's what I was going to do. I'm going to give it a shot with my rucksack and my tent and my camping stove, and set off. I gave myself 6 weeks to do it in, and I think it took me just over 5 weeks in the end. And I walked most of it alone. I made a note of it earlier, it took me 37 days, and 5 of those days were days off. And so 32 walking days, and I had people joining me for 6 of those days, and the rest of the time was all on my own. So when I was looking to set off on the walk, I love a spreadsheet, and so this became a bit of an obsession of coming up with a plan of roughly what I was going to walk every day. And on the Walk Highlands website, this is lifted from the Walk Highlands website, so the actual full map doesn't fit on a website page because it's so long, as you can see, going from the south there right up to the north. And these are the different days that they have split it into, just to give you an idea. But I didn't follow that completely. I would do slightly longer some days, slightly shorter some days. And yeah, all the way up from the south. And I decided to start in the south because it was much gentler. And having not ever done any long distance walking before on my own, I suppose I was just a bit cautious and a little bit apprehensive about what that might be like. And so the south was much more gentle and the paths were easier to follow. And the further north I got, it was more gnarly and there were patches where there was no path at all. But luckily, the Walk Highlands website, you can download all of the maps and it can show you exactly where you are at any time, even without signal, which is great. And I also took a personal locator beacon with me just in case, because there were patches of obviously where there was no signal, particularly in the north of the trail. So yeah, 864 kilometers or 534 miles, and I was surprised how much I enjoyed every moment of it. I honestly thought I would be crying walking up hills, but it was just so much more joyful than I would ever have thought. And I think part of that reason being that I left my laptop at home, and because it was over such a long period of time, there was no thinking ahead of like, oh, I need to do this thing on Monday, or here's my to-do list for next week. It was, I've got 5 or 6 weeks and I've set my out of office reply and I'm free, which was a very liberating experience. My computer's a bit slow going through this. Oh, let me see. Oh, here we go. So it was quite a last minute decision really, to take some recording equipment. I went on an amazing course a couple of years ago with sound recordist Jez Riley French, and through that kind of started honing my kit a little bit, and this was the kit that I ended up having with me, and I threw it in my bag as a last minute decision because I thought there might be something really, really cool, an amazing sound that I encounter that I want to record. And so I took the Zoom H5 with me and a stereo pair of Fell Clippy mics, and that was it. The mics I got little fluffies for, so to stop wind noise, especially. Well, I thought that would be a massive problem in Scotland because it's just windy all the time, and a power pack, and that was it. So I was obviously conscious of carrying this huge weight with me. It was about 15 kilograms in my bag in total, and so every little thing I was trying to get rid of whatever I could. But I'm so glad I took this recording equipment. And the motivation for me for this walk was just to take time out from work, and after a busy period of years of trying to scrape by and try and make it as a self-employed musician, I just felt like I needed a bit of a break and a bit of time off. And I had no plan to record anything that would be released or write any music while I was away. And I think that freedom was really important to this project because it was never an intention to make an album of recordings. And it just was a happy accident that that's kind of what happened in the end. See if these, here we go. So another thing I did on the walk was I sent myself a postcard every day. So I had my recording equipment and I decided on the bus on the way down to Kirk Yetholm, which is the start of the walk, that every day I would record a sound, any sound that I heard along the walk, and I'd also write myself a postcard. So the postcards got sent back home to Shetland, and it was basically just a way for me to make a quick note of what I'd done. And it was a really lovely thing coming home at the end of it to this big pile of postcards with all of this information on. So yeah, I had a daily postcard and a daily sound. And this was just, I was looking back through my photos and this was just a screenshot. I must have been going into an area where it had not very good signal, and so I'd taken a screenshot of a part of the walks just to give you an idea of what the Walk Highlands maps look like. They're really detailed and you can also see yourself along the map. So it shows up as a little blue dot, which is really useful. And you know how far you've gone as well. So yeah, started off in the south of Scotland, and the weather for pretty much the entire walk was like this. It was very unusual, especially for anyone who knows Scotland at all. I was expecting to be soaking wet for the entire time. I think it rained on 3 days, and 2 of those days was torrential downpour. But actually, it was just very amusing because it was so soggy and wet, and I knew that I was going to be able to get dry again. I was just so very lucky that the weather was blue skies for pretty much the whole thing. If anything, it was too hot. So this is a picture from the first day. A picture of me having stopped. Those are my knees. Having stopped for my lunch, with a view out over a wheat field, I think. And I had real trouble, and it was really interesting. I'd love to hear from you guys as well about long distance walking, and if you've come up against any difficulties during those, because the thing for me that was difficult was being able to train for it in advance. I spend a lot of time on tour in a car or in a bus, or I'm sitting down a lot, and it's really hard to get in enough exercise to train for something that's such a long distance walk. I was walking about 30 kilometers a day, and there's not enough time in the day for me to prepare for that. So in the first week, I got fit really quickly. Within 3 days, I felt like my bag was weighed a lot less. It was a lot easier walking, but my feet and my knees gave me a lot of trouble in that first week. But to a point that I thought I might have to stop walking. But after I bought some new insoles for my shoes and changed from using walking shoes to walking boots, and all of my troubles went away. So, but yeah, blister plasters were great though. So yeah, just some of the amazing, beautiful views I saw of walking up over the hills. The Scottish National Trail kind of takes the path of least resistance. So it's not trying to go up Munros or mountains. It's going on old coffin roads, old drove roads, and very much as taking the lowest possible route. Although obviously some places you still have to go over pretty major mountains. So yeah, just a few more pictures of the walk. And I think we're going to hear in a second, I'm going to get you to go and listen to one of the first recordings. This is a site along the St Cuthbert's Way in the south of the walk, and these are the three brethren, and it was just down the hill from here that I took my third field recording, and probably one of my absolute favourites from that walk. And in this location, Screech's Tired Frown. So every day I decided, I'm going to stop here for lunch, or my feet are sore, I'm going to stop, or there's a really interesting sound, I'll stop here and record it. And I made a note of the location using the What Three Words location. So anyone who's not familiar with What Three Words, I think is it a 3 meter square or maybe a meter square? I can't even remember now. Location across the globe has got a unique 3 words, and all you need to do is search for those 3 words, like Screech's Tired Frowns, and it will take you to the exact spot. And it's really useful for finding places when you're going to go and stay somewhere or visit somebody. But I wanted to make a note of the exact location where I made the recordings, and I did that every day. So I wrote those down, and they became the track titles for every recording on the album. So this one that you're going to get you to hear in a second, was recorded just near this wood, and I happened to stop, I think just because I needed some water, and I heard my first cuckoo of the trip. So yeah, maybe what I'll get you to do now is follow the link that Andrew's put in the chat, and just get you to listen to the very first recording called Screech's Tired Frowns. So this is day 3 of the walk. So that the first recording for you to listen to is cuckoos and cyclists. And so when I was using the fell clippy mics, I always tried to position them. I put them on, usually clip them to my rucksack, but about ear distance apart to get this idea of the kind of binaural sound. And I just love it just happened that way, that these cyclists came whizzing past. It's quite a popular mountain biking route. Um, so so yeah, I mean, I honestly can't believe how amazing the weather was, and this was my little tent that I took with me, a two-man tent. Although I always think you can never fit two men or women in these tents; they're so tiny. But I brought a slightly bigger tent in order to put my bag in, because I was pretty sure it would be soaking every single day and it would need to dry off. So just a little community woodland that I found to camp in. And I can't remember who was saying, but yeah, in Scotland we have the right to roam, so you can walk anywhere, and you can, as long as it's not somebody's private garden, and you can also camp anywhere, which is great. There was the route goes up through Edinburgh, and at that point I was having particular trouble with my knees, and luckily I had a day off the next day, and I was walking into town and came past an Asda, and somebody had dumped a shopping trolley far away from the entrance to Asda, so I borrowed that shopping trolley for a short while, and it was a relief to take my bag off my back. um, the shopping trolley was returned the next day, by the way. So yeah, this next recording called Minder Booms Open. So you can actually, if you wanted to go away after this and listen to all of the recordings, you could follow the progress of the walk on the What Three Words app. So yeah, we'll do the same thing again. Maybe just listen to about a minute of this one, because I think it's about 5 minutes long. This is me under this motorway tunnel under the M8, walking along the Union Canal between Edinburgh and Glasgow, and there were loads of tunnels along the canal, and I sang under each one because they all sounded so lovely, but this one had particularly lovely resonance. So yeah, I'll let you go and have a listen to maybe just a minute of that one. All of these are available to listen to online for free. I'll put the Bandcamp link to the whole album on afterwards. Um, so so yeah, I should have said as well that so I only recorded about 5 minutes every day, and when I came back, I listened to them all and thought, oh, I wish I'd recorded more. And I spoke to Jez Riley French about it as well. He said that's one thing, that was the one takeaway message from the recording week I had with him, was just always record for longer than you think you should, and I wish I had done it a bit differently, but at the time there was no plan to ever do anything with them. It was much more like, I just want this as a sound diary for in 20 years time when I go back and listen to these and I can imagine where I am on that walk. And so yeah, I made about 5 or 10 minutes recording each day in just a random spot that I thought sounded all right. And when I came to editing them, the tracks, I did a tiny bit of EQ on a few of them, but the length of the track corresponds to the number of kilometers I walked that day. So there's 6 seconds of located sound recording for every kilometer that I walked. So each one's about 3 minutes long for that reason. And there's a couple of exceptions. This one's a little bit longer because I had so much fun singing under the tunnel. And there's another one that we're going to listen to a little bit shortly, which is a bit longer as well, just because I loved the sound. So yeah, this was another part of the walk, and I think it was quite nice recording every day because it all just sounded so different, whether I was near a city or in the wilds. And quite often, obviously, there was always an element of human noise. This is my feet getting progressively more battered. Still, I don't think anyone believes me with this weather, but yeah, it's not like this in Scotland normally. So yeah, we walked past the Falkirk Wheel, which I'd never been to before. This was a day that I had a friend join me, and it was the hottest, probably one of the hottest days. It must have been about 30 degrees, and there's no shade along the canal, and it was, yeah, we both struggled quite a lot that day, but we walked about 26 kilometers, I think, and this was a good stop. We got a few ice creams here at the Falkirk Wheel. And I took a photo of all sorts of things, and I just really loved this crispy frog, so I thought I'd include that in the talk. Managed to sort out my knees a bit, so I saw someone there in the chat saying about wearing a couple of pairs of socks and also wearing walking boots. And I think the reason I'd originally taken walking shoes is because I watched quite a few videos of people doing long distance walks, and they always said, oh yeah, just wear walking shoes, but they just didn't work for me. So I think it's finding what works for you, and this knee tape was a game changer. I've had problems with my knees in the past, and strapping up my knees every day just made such a huge difference. I suppose, 15 kilograms or 13 kilograms extra weight on your body is a lot of pressure. So yeah, knee tape was great as well. I'd highly recommend that. And this is one of my prized possessions from the walk. And one of the most lovely memories, I think. There were so many wonderful wildlife encounters. One of them was a short-eared owl encounter, and I spotted them before they saw me, and recorded them calling. And I'd never heard short-eared owls calling before, so managed to get a recording of them and found one of their feathers as well. And again, just another camp spot, and a lovely dipper right there in the middle of the picture. Again, I was already sat on this rock, and it didn't spot me. And I think there was something about walking when I was on my own which was I just really enjoyed, because I could walk at my own pace. My partner is really fit and does he's a seabird biologist, and whenever we're out walking, he's miles ahead of me, because he's got a huge long stride, and he can walk uphill as fast as I can run downhill. And it's always made me feel like I'm maybe a bit unfit, but actually when I was walking on my own, I could carry on walking for hours without needing to stop, because I was going at my own body's pace. And the other lovely thing about walking on my own was actually getting to encounter this wildlife, because I wasn't talking or like making noise. So yeah, the dipper, one of my favorite birds. And then this was just my kit, my stove, and yeah, carried that with me. It was great. And yeah, as I said, I met up with a few people. One of them was my mum, who was on this call, and my dad, who was also in the chat with my mum there. And this was mum came and met me for a day or two. It came and met me for a couple of days, and we stopped at this loch, and we watched ospreys and recorded ospreys. A male bringing fish in for the chicks, and they were peeping away for this fish, and it was just a magical wildlife experience, and the sounds of that. So I'm not going to play you that recording, but that one is available to listen to. But the other one I'm going to play for you is from this same site, but a blackbird and a song thrush. It's their dusk chorus, and churn squashes easily. I love all the names, these what three words names. So again, this is about an 8-minute long recording, but we'll just to give you a little bit of an idea, just go and have a wee listen, maybe just for a minute. So yeah, I just love this sound, and one of the things I really enjoy about re-listening to tracks like this, especially when you're editing them or deciding which bits to use for things, it's just how much, for me anyway, sound really places me in a location more so than a picture. So when I hear this, I can picture exactly where I was when I recorded it, and I'm transported back to that place. And I don't think I'd realized how much sound affects me in that way until listening back to these recordings, and I could imagine exactly the walk I did that day because of the sound that had been recorded. So yeah, so no parabolic reflector. Yes, Arthur said that in the chat. I felt like I was inches away from these birds. And honestly, the mics are amazing. So that whole kit, the Zoom H5 and the pair of mics, I think cost me about £350. And I was so chuffed with how it all worked. And yeah, it makes me wonder just how amazing a recording you could get with a parabolic reflector. So um so I'll just, yeah, there's another picture of me drying clothes on my tent. Another recording here, it's of a rookery, so maybe we'll skip this one because there's a few more pictures and things to show you, but you'd be able to go and listen back to it. But it was the chorus of a rookery that they were all in these trees here, and the little location there with the three lines, that's where my tent was. And I thought I would never get to sleep because of the rookery, but it was a lovely chorus to fall asleep to. I think I was so tired every day, it didn't matter what noises I heard. So again, yeah, just walking along by the river, and somebody said again about, it's really great for your feet to put them in the cold water, and that was something I did every day. And sometimes I'd stop multiple times a day to put my feet in cold water just to cool them down and reduce swelling and stuff, because it was just so hot. And things that I found along the way, lovely dragonflies. As somebody put in the chat there, the weather is just isn't normal anymore, Catherine saying that, and this was really concerning for me. So right up in the Cairngorms, this is a bog, and I've never seen a bog this dry before. So this was probably after 3 weeks of walking, with the weather in the 20s, in the 20 degrees, and to see this patch of land that would normally be spongy wet underfoot and you'd be soaking no matter how dry or warm it'd be, it was like this. And it was it made me really worry for the place, because you just feel like it could just light very easily. And then into one of my favourite places is the Cairngorms National Park, and some Scots pine, granny pines here. It was just really lovely to go on this walk and place all of these different locations in relation to each other, because we're so used to driving. I'm so used to driving. It's really hard to gauge how far places are from one another, and it was a really nice way to experience this country that I felt like I know really well, but actually I go on the walk like this and realise I don't know it at all. And the Uath Lochans in the Cairngorms, another favourite spot there. There's a recording that I made here of hoverflies and songbirds. And then my dad, my dad joined me for one of the hardest days of the walk, and it was absolutely sweltering, and we had some gin and tonics, non-alcoholic gin and tonics, when we finally got to our spot, our camping spot. And there's I sneakily recorded my dad getting into his bivy bag, and there were loads of midges, and it's the only recording I've ever made, including any of my more sort of traditional music stuff, that has an explicit lyric warning, because my dad swears while he's getting into his bivy bag about all the midges. So for anyone who's not familiar, midges are very tiny, really annoying little insects, and they just swarm you when the weather's really calm in the summer. And so this was before they'd come out, but yeah, the midges were quite bad. And luckily my dad agreed to let me release this track. So what? Oh yeah, so this is just to show that it wasn't rain, it wasn't nice weather all the time. Maybe we can just listen to 30 seconds of this track. It was the first day of really heavy rain. Oh no, the second day of really heavy rain, and it was a big thought to get out of my tent and start walking. But I think when you know that you've got the right kit, it's actually not that daunting. And so I had a really good waterproof jacket with me, and I think I tended to walk when it was raining not with waterproof trousers on, because it was too hot but I knew I'd be able to get dry again, and so it wasn't really a bother. If it had been windy and cold, it would have been a different matter. But yeah, so maybe just have a 30-second listen to Flock Amazed Tent to hear the heavy rain on the tent. So yeah, lots of rain on the tent that morning. It sounded a bit like popcorn popping, or Andrew's put there a round of applause. Yeah, it's that kind of. It's just so loud when you're in a tent, isn't it? Which I love, but also, as I said, the thought of getting out of a tent when it's like that is not ideal. Um, and one of my favourite plants. This was on this the day of walking in the absolute downpour. I stopped. I think I stopped 3 times to take my boots off and pour water out of them and wring out my socks. But again, I honestly, I was just, I enjoyed it. I was laughing because it was comically wet. It was like somebody standing there with a bucket throwing water over my head. Um, and yeah, a nice alternative to a refreshing alternative to the sun. So Carol asking there, did you also bring a camera or did you use a phone? These are all my phone photos. So I thought about bringing a camera, but I decided to take my recording equipment instead. So this is just all my phone. And one of the most spectacular waterfalls on the trip. This is quite a steep day. So by this point, it's about day 24, day 25, and it's really getting into the more wilds of the walk, which was what I was most excited about, I suppose. So building up in confidence from the first bit of walk, and yeah, just getting into the wilds. And I think um, pretty much every day, I think I did see somebody walking or cycling or something, and people doing. I met a few people doing epically long walks. Somebody going from um, John O'Groats all the way through France. I think it was so all sorts of amazing adventures that people were on. And this was the bothy I stayed at midsummer, and we call it Simmerdim in Shetland. It just means midsummer, and it was probably my worst night's sleep of the whole trip, because I think there were mice in the building, and I was half expecting people to turn up because it was midsummer, and there was something about the place that just, the hackles were up, and the hairs, and I could feel them up the back of my neck, and so it was probably the worst night's sleep I had of the whole time. But yeah, we have these amazing bothies in Scotland, and they're in various states of repair, but this was a very nice one. But yeah, I probably would have got a better night's sleep if I just slept just outside in my tent. And this is all my gubbins from my bag, and that's inside the bothy. And that's just me having a cup of tea on midsummer. Stunning views. It was just a gorgeous gorgeous evening. And then another surprise. So this was my birthday, and my mum and my dad and my husband Will came and joined me, and I knew my mum and dad were coming, but Will said he wasn't going to be able to come, and then he pretended to be a hitchhiker sitting at the side of the road. And then we had a day walking together, which was really nice. It was probably the shortest day, actually. I think it was about 16 kilometers or something, and it was just really lovely seeing people spaced out along the walk, and getting to have a laugh, and yeah, it was really nice. So not a flattering picture, sorry, Dad. And again, just having time to stop and look at things. I think that was a really nice thing about walking on my own, was when I felt tired, I could stop. When I needed water, I would stop. But otherwise, I would just carry on walking, and whatever I saw, I can just stop and take a picture of it rather than feeling like I'm holding anyone back. So I really enjoyed that. Another bothy, a really lovely bothy. There was a few people staying in there that night. It's just such a lovely system, the bothy system in Scotland, and you just never know who you're going to meet and what interesting conversations you're going to have. And yeah, it was a lovely stay there. And I really loved this. I took a photo of this. When I get too old to catch fish and drink beer, put me in a boat and set me on fire. somebody had written on the bothy wall. And the bothy, that was the next morning, just when I was leaving, heading straight uphill. It was probably the steepest walk that day. And some of the views. And another friend who met me. This was a bit of Coffin Road, another really steep part of the walk. And there's quite a few bothies we walked past. There's a lot of bothies up in the northwest. So I could have stayed in many of these, but didn't. Another spot, stopping to camp. And this is really getting up into the wilds now. And this was probably the worst visibility day. So yeah, another rainy day. We're getting quite close to the north now. It's just a couple of days away. It was a really tough day on the feet. It was really wet and hard walking, and we had to walk all the way. I was with my dad again, and we had to walk all the way around this bay to get to the other side. And this is what we were aiming for, these bothies. And this amazing spelling of it, I love this spelling of I thought revolt. It felt appropriate. So. And the last day was going up towards Sandwood Bay and then on up to Cape Wrath, it's a weird place because it's owned by the MOD, and so sometimes they shut it down because they're firing missiles. It's very bizarre, but luckily they were not firing missiles that day. So Dad joined me for the last day of walking, and this is at Sandwood Bay, which is an amazing sandy beach. And I feel like we're both looking quite healthy, and I'm looking very delighted that I've made it. And then, yeah, just pointing at Cape Wrath. And then that's me there. I think it was just really windy. I'm not crying because I've being impressed that I got there. I think it was just very, very windy. And so there's one more recording at the end there, but maybe we'll leave that for now, but you can go back and listen to it. Afterwards. I think that's it. Oh yeah, and then afterwards I came home and listened to the recordings and thought it's a really interesting, to me anyway, a really interesting snapshot of Scotland at that time, and I just put them together in this album, Paths Made Walking. Yeah, so yeah, that's about it, I suppose. So thanks very much for listening. Very open to having like a discussion if anyone's got any questions.
Yeah, I think Jenny, there are a few. If you scoot through the backwards through the thing,
Oh,
I think you'll find
yeah.
you've answered quite a few, but I think there's one from Amy saying she's interested in how people practically balance walking and stopping to record and take photos, etc.
And this is open to anyone as well, so anyone else feel free to chip in. I suppose for me, because I hadn't planned to do it as like a project or a piece of work, there was something quite nice about just stopping whenever I felt like it. And I think if I'd set out to record an album of sounds every day, the sounds I would have stopped to record would have been very different. And it was more like, oh, I've stopped here to have my lunch. Oh, and that actually sounds quite nice. I'm just going to stick up some mics, because it's the only reason to record at that time was just as a memory jogger for myself. So yeah, I think it would have probably been quite different otherwise. But yeah, I can imagine it could feel a bit of an interruption to stop and take photos or record sounds. And I think that's probably why I decided not to record for very long as well. So it was like it was kind of opportunistic, really.
Well, just below from where Carol asked you about what camera you used, Whitney asked the question. Whitney, do you want to come off mic and actually ask the question?
Sure. I was just curious how you chose the sounds for the album ultimately, and then what sort of processing or editing you did to them and sort of what headspace you went in when you were thinking about them through that album lens.
Yeah, I only had a sound a day, so I had to use what I had. So it would have been obviously very different if the weather had been incredibly windy, and it would have mostly been wind noise. So I was lucky in that regard. But in terms of, obviously there was 5 minute, most of them were about 5 or 8, 10 minutes long. So I just listened through the entire track and then picked a bit I particularly liked, and where pretty much all of them are entire sections. So I didn't cut and make cuts and splice bits together to get the best sounds. It was like, okay, this day I walked 30 kilometers. That going with my 6 seconds per kilometer, that corresponds to 3 minutes. So I'm going to take an entire 3 minute chunk, and it is what it is from that. And I was also conscious to not want to do much EQ or anything. So there's no effects on it. The only thing would be a little bit of EQ if there was a really low rumble of wind. I'd maybe nip that in a little bit. Um do like a low cut on the EQ. And similarly, there was maybe a few high frequencies occasionally, but most of them are completely flat, and they're just as they were recorded, and it was just luck, I think, that they turned out that way.
Could I say something there?
Yeah.
Uh, Jeff here again. Yeah, when I first started recording myself, which actually was in the Highlands as well, I mean, it was back in the days of digital audio. It was digital audio tape, but a 2 hour tape cost really quite a lot. And then there was battery power was an issue because I had about 40 minutes of battery power usually. So I used to choose a little bit like yourself, choose very carefully what I would record, because something better might be along the way. So I didn't want to use too much battery power on one thing. And back then, well, no, let's move to now, where I might record. I mean, I don't do a lot of recording, but about 2 weeks ago, I left my kit out overnight, and I've got 15 hours of the woodland here. And that's sort of, I don't usually do 15 hours, but I'll do an hour or two at a spot if things are good. And it becomes so much harder to decide what bits to use. I mean, on a good day, I love the whole piece. And I like the early days, which, my first month in the Highlands, the first year I was serious about it. I spent a month in the Highlands, and I came back with about 7 hours worth altogether. But over the next so many months, I knew it almost the whole lot intimately. So I knew exactly the bits I wanted to use. Whereas nowadays, I really struggle to pick out the bits. And I think it's quite good what you did, choosing those moments. You'll come into difficult if you start recording longer. You'll face the same dilemmas as I did, I think. Yeah, there we
Yeah.
go.
Oh, yeah. It's kind of that it's like a blessing and a curse, isn't it? I think having power packs that where you can't, like, it's amazing to be able to record overnight and just leave kit out and hear things that you maybe otherwise wouldn't hear because you're not present there yourself at the time. Yeah, there's definitely pros and cons to both, aren't there? And
Yeah.
yeah,
And the other thing about long form recording is that you get the passage of how animals and how the day moves, the whole soundscape sort of shifts, and then maybe it comes back in the evening and goes through different things. There's waves of different species of bird come in and out, which I love really, but yeah, hard to choose bits.
yeah. And sometimes it's lovely just I think when I first started using field recordings and I was editing something like something sort of more musical, using some bird recordings, bird song recordings, and just having, to be honest, just having the bird song playing through my laptop. It was like the middle of winter and I was living in Aberdeen, and just having that sound playing just instantly felt more awake. And like, I don't know, it's just like, oh, it's like lulling me into a false sense of it being springtime or something. So having those recordings, I imagine, is amazing, like these long long duration recordings, even just having them on in the background, or just while you're going about your day. Sometimes I think that would be like such an uplifting thing to have.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'd be interested, Jenny, to ask you about the podcast or the radio program you did for Scottish Outdoors,
Oh yeah.
because there you had a producer producing the work, if that makes sense. So did they doctor your recordings, or did
They
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 did
took
they use their own? What was the
No, they so I think I sent them, I think they were a bit surprised because I got in touch with them when I was like when I came back from the walk and said, "Would you be up for this?" And they'd not heard anything I'd made before, like because I've not done loads of podcast making. And so they said yes. And then when I sent it over, I think they were pleasantly surprised by this piece that ended up being about 30 minutes long. I think it's still available on BBC
Yeah,
Scotland.
it is. I've put a link on the website, on
Okay.
the event page, so people can listen to that.
And
Um,
but they only took out one bit, and it was where I would think I was explaining a bit more about the project, where I was talking about the what three words connection and stuff, and I think they took out maybe 30 seconds of me talking about that, but otherwise left it in its entirety, which I thought was quite amazing, especially because some of it's like quite personal. And they left it in, and so it's quite interesting. Yeah, but I was delighted by that.
there was a question about the artwork for your album.
Oh yeah, I'm a part-time artist alongside being a musician, so that was a um this is a very niche album. I'm aware of that, and I released it on Hudson Records, who release all of my other music, and it's a very much a departure from them to release something like this. And we were trying to keep the costs down as much as possible. So I spent a day in my friend's studio and had fun making a mess, and that's what came out of it.
Amy's asking whether there was any narration on the album,
There is no narration on the album apart from my dad swearing at midgies.
which Arthur wants you to play. So I
Oh yeah,
think that's what.
I can look up which one it is for you. um, oh, and there's
Um, yeah, I'm kind of interested about the Hudson um, record company. The music producers. Uh, how do they? Were they open to? Well, they clearly were open to having an
yeah.
uh, ambient sounds
Yeah,
album.
they're amazing. Like it's run by a couple of, well, they've become really good friends who run it, and I think they're just really invested in the people they have on the record label. So you come to them with a harebrained idea of putting an album out of 33 field recordings from a walk, and they're like, "Yeah, okay, we'll make it work." So they were just really supportive, and yeah, it kind of also links in, I suppose, with the Nan Shepherd album, The Living Mountain, that I made. So there's a kind of a bit of a connection there. There was lots of field recordings on that too, and that idea of walking, I suppose, is common between the two things. So yeah, they're never going to make any money out of it, but this album, but
And what was your own personal discovery of yourself? What of your character have you left behind on the path, and what have you gained?
I think the effect of being on the walk stayed with me for a really long time. Like I felt like there was like a peacefulness about myself, and I think it was being more in tune with my body and my rhythm, and also just getting away from the laptop again. So I think that kind of stayed with me for maybe like 8 months or something. That kind of the the space that walk brought for me, and now it's back to the usual slight fray of job. But I honestly didn't think I would get. I wasn't expecting to get to the end, and I thought I would. If I did, I wouldn't enjoy it. But I think that is something that's definitely come out of it. Is just giving it a bash, and like if the weather had been different, it would be. If I did it again this summer, it would be a completely different experience. And yeah, as Arthur says, it's the freedom and you know, as long as you have the appropriate equipment, and you know, if the weather had been awful, I would have been okay because I had the right equipment. And I made a
But also you had the right mindset, because
yeah.
I mean, one of the things you started out with was a mindset which
Mm,
was appropriate for a long walk.
yeah, yeah. And I think um, some of that, and maybe other people here can add to that as well. But I think for me, some of it was just not thinking about the end. It was taking each day at a time. It's like, okay, well, all I need, and I think the lovely thing about going on a long walk is all you need to think about is how your body is, when you're going to eat, that you're getting enough water, and that you've got somewhere to sleep, and that's it. Um, and so it was taking a day at a time, and I'd stop when my body had had enough or when my brain had had enough. And the thing I found really interesting was that most of the time there was nothing going on in my brain. After I got used to it, after 2 or 3 days, it was like I'd get an earworm for a little while. I'd just be like really consciously looking at what I was seeing, looking at the map and looking at what I was seeing. And I think there was a mindfulness and a freedom within that that I don't often get on a day-to-day basis. And I think probably a lot of us don't get because of we have, you know, the work that we do and a bombardment of information online and everything. And the closest I can get to that now is going out and recording with my field recording stuff and with my headphones on because it feels like, and by headphones on I mean listening to what I'm recording, not listening to an album. um so yeah, it's really being in that place. And I think having the recording equipment, for me when I'm at home in Shetland or wherever I am doing a little recording somewhere, I'm so in that space. And because it's almost like seeing, it's like a another dimension because it's louder, and you do notice, oh, that's really like, what is that sound over there? And you can't help thinking about, you know, I'm not thinking about my to-do list because I'm so absorbed in that moment. And I think that's yeah, the kind of only way I can get that when I'm not doing a big walk. Yeah.
And Whitney, I think you should take over being the host. You've come out with some cracking good questions. You know, you've got one back there. Uh, do you want to talk us through that one?
Well, I really
Uh,
loved how you mentioned motivation in the beginning, and your motivation to, you know, take a break from work was very specific. And so I'm curious how the documenting of like the post production after the walk, how that motivation evolved for to motivate you through creating the album and such.
Yeah, I I think I wouldn't. Yeah, I think I wouldn't have had the same motivation if I, as I said, if like I'd gone into it thinking I was going to do a project thing out of it. But yeah, I think I was just so amazed by what could be heard out on a walk in Scotland, all the variety and the biodiversity of what I was seeing and hearing, that kind of motivated me. And when I was listening to the recordings, just it was like reliving the walk because you know, it's that kind of, as I was saying, for me it's when I hear that sound of the rookery, I can picture exactly where I was, and I can picture the walk that day. And I can't quite picture what I had for dinner, but I can remember if I washed my socks that day, or if I had a shower in the campsite showers, or there's so many other things that come out of that. And so it was lovely to revisit the walk, not just through photos or even just through the postcards. It was the kind of combination of the three things. So yeah, I think that kind of was a motivation behind it, of just reliving what was a really joyful experience. Yeah.
I must say I'm sort of nodding away because I interview people on a walk, and something that I find it's almost therapeutic in a sense is the editing of it, because I actually go back and
Mm,
obviously clearly have to listen to their conversation and my conversation, you know, several times over.
mm,
Um, but it's extraordinary how enriching everything around that happens with my mind, because I suddenly think of so many other things that happened on that day, You know, there's a lot of stuff which is sort of outtake, you know, which I might cut out of the conversation, you know, which wouldn't make much sense to the finished product sort of thing, and I find that really fascinating. Other questions? Uh, uh, I mean, there were some good number of people here on the call still, so that's great. And you know, we haven't heard from you, so you know, if you want to shout out and ask a question or put something in the chat. I mean, one thing I asked Jenny when we were having a sort of little pre-chat on the marketing video that we did, I asked her, you know, you're a musician, you know, surely you took an instrument with you on the walk, and I said, you know, what, did you have a harmonica or a bird whistle or something like that? And she said to me, you know, I was a musician on holiday, you know, I wasn't going to take an instrument, but I'm interested. I mean, you sang along in the tunnels of the canal, but were there other places where you were singing or humming, or did you suddenly feel a composition come to you that was going to be?
No.
Have you written any songs since? I mean, you know, do you know, while you were on the walk, did you suddenly crack open you know, a new theme of creativity on your music?
I thought that maybe would happen, but it didn't at all. And I was quite glad of that in a way, that the impulse didn't take me to write lyrics or write come up with melodies. Most of the time I had like earworms of other, mostly like pop and funk songs in my head, which I quite enjoyed. But there was nothing. Yeah, and even since, it's almost like it feels like I can't go there yet, and maybe I will at some point. But yeah, there was usually singing along the way and humming and things going through my head, but it was usually things that I was familiar with that already existed, rather than coming up with new things. And that felt quite liberating, and there was a freedom to that as well, because it again didn't feel like work, I think. Going, I was just thinking, going back to the motivation thing, and it would be lovely to hear from you all as to what motivates you to walk. But one of the things that I found quite interesting was how varied motivation was, in when I met people, and also in the bothies. There's quite often guest books, and people have written in there why they're walking, and that might be somebody's had a medical scare with something, or there's been some loss in their life, or they've had a big change, that they've got some time off between one job and the start of a next thing. The different motivations are so vast, and I found that really interesting. And I also found it very interesting and sometimes amusing, like after I came back from the walk, it was almost like people were fishing for, like, so why did you do this walk, and did something happen in your life that meant you wanted to do the walk? And I was like, no, I just like walking. But it was quite amusing to me that was almost what people wanted to know. It's like, why did you actually, but actually, why did you do this?
Okay, there were a couple of technical questions in the chat. One was from Catherine about wind.
Oh yeah.
And the other was from Amy about binaural. So Catherine, do you want to ask what you're after? And
Sure. Yeah, I've used small clip mics before, and you know, they need some sort of wind protection. So I'm wondering what you used, because the wind recording sounded beautiful.
Oh, thank you. I think I was really lucky that it wasn't that windy, was one of the things. But I had so I bought the fell clippy mics, and with them as an extra, you could buy these little, like, I don't even know what they're called, like the fluffy things. It's like a little animal you put on top.
Oh yeah, the Rycoat. Yeah,
the rye. It's like a Rycoat, yeah, basically. And then just if it was a little bit windy, just tried to position the mics in such a way that they weren't in a really windy spot. So I think that was quite good, having my backpack, because I could use that as a bit of a windbreak.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, just having the Rycoat kind of protectors on it was what it was. Yeah.
Yeah, I just love the the small kit, finding a small kit that works
Yeah.
for you.
Yeah. That was that was a bit of a game changer, because it made me realize that there's so much great kit out there, and some of it is quite large and heavy, and actually being able to have different setups for different purposes, like, was really useful. So I couldn't have possibly dreamt of taking a bigger setup with me, just because I didn't have the space or the weight allowance for that.
Sure.
But then maybe that compromised the sound a little bit, but then also that's part of it, if that makes sense. So
I think it sounded amazing, but
oh,
you can
thank
do a
you.
lot with just binaural
Yeah.
placement makes so much difference. You don't have to have super expensive mics.
Yeah.
Seems like.
Yeah. That's a good.
I'm just cooking breakfast here. So feel free to keep chatting about whatever you wish, and I will listen.
But you asked a question about binaural.
Yes, I don't know if others are interested in that techie stuff as well, but I would love to hear about how you set that up and worked with it and what it can do for people listening.
Yes. So has everybody heard of binaural recording before? If any, this it's basically this idea of I suppose it's setting up mics in a way that it's how you hear things with your actual lugs, or your ears, if you're not from Scotland, your lugs. So I've only really ventured into it a little bit, and that's been on this Paths Made Walking album. I've done a little bit of other work with it, and it's not technical what I've done at all. It's basically putting a couple of mics on a bag or on a hat can be really good, where your ears are, and putting the mics in a position where your ears are as well. So having the mics by the side of your head, and then pointing in the direction of your ears, and that's as technical as I get. And you can buy all sorts of amazing microphones that that actually, I've got a friend who's got some that are a set of ears, like rubber ears that have mics in them. But even it's just thinking about positioning, and I think it's most effective of the recordings that I've done in that one with the bicycles and the cuckoo. So the cuckoo's like kind of in front of you, and the bike comes from your left to your right, and so it's just sort of setting up the mics with that in mind. And it's a stereo pair, and making sure the left and right are in the right place when it comes to mixing it, or just like balancing it. But I'm afraid I'm not very good at the technical side. It's more just playing and see what happens. But yeah, setting them up roughly where your ears are, I suppose.
Yeah, because that leads on to Catherine. You were asking about the compositional process, and you heard a little bit of it there. But
I guess my question was also about sort of, once you got home with your recordings and your postcard, what was your sort of editing process like as you put your piece together?
It was quite simple, I suppose. Like I just like read through all of the postcards and listened back through all the tracks, and I just dragged them all. I use Logic, so I just dragged all of the tracks. Every single track was a different track within Logic, and just balanced them like that, really. So it was really simple, I would say. And some of them have like I suppose the only real compositional thing, because I only had one recording a day to work from, it was the only compositional decisions for this project was to which roughly 3-minute section I was going to pick out of the 5-minute recording. And there, as I was saying earlier, there are a couple that are a bit longer. So one of them's 5 minutes and the other one's 8 minutes. And I thought it was just a shame to cut those shorter, because they were such a moment of that walk, like with the song thrush and the blackbird. That's about an 8-minute recording, because I just thought it might be a moment within that walk that people can kind of just really, I don't know, really feel into it and relax, I suppose. And just quite a few people have been in touch saying that they put this record on a lot when they're doing work, because there isn't anything to distract them in terms of musical accompaniment. And whether it is almost like taking a breath, I don't know. But yeah, I suppose the only other compositional thing was just whether to add fades or not at the start and the end of things. And yeah, that's probably, it was very simple. It was really funny as well. So I sent them off to Andy at Hudson Records, and he mastered them and sent them back. And I'm tried to be really diligent with listening to masters in case there's been anything that's like really popped out, any pops or clicks or things like that that maybe weren't in the original, and for some reason it's like amplified some frequency. But I found it so hard to stay awake. So I'd be listening with my headphones on, and I concentrate best with my eyes shut on sound. So I'd be listening with my eyes shut and my headphones on, and I would fall asleep every single time. And I thought, well, to me, that's a good sign. It's like a relaxing piece of work. And if people find that useful, then that's good. As long as they're not falling asleep because they're bored.
I love that you set these limits for yourself, 5 minutes a day, and then using everything and having the postcards. That's also a short form. It seems like you sort of pre-thought of a method that would make it really easy for you to create a piece at the end.
Yeah, it would just I'm glad I did it the way I did. I don't think I would change anything. Well, maybe to record for a little bit longer. Maybe I would have recorded for 10 minutes if I'd been a bit more planned with it. But yeah, no, it worked out really well having it's like basically when I was releasing the album, it would be like a picture of that day, a postcard of that day, and a sound of the day. And yeah.
Well, Jenny, I think that's fantastic. You kept us entertained all the way through, pretty close on 90 minutes. So a really good stuff on that. I'm gonna say that I think we're sort of, at the time to wrap up, and I want to thank you very much for putting everything together. But Jenny, thank you so much for this evening. Thank you very much, Quentin, too, also for recommending you, even though he's not on the call. And thanks to everybody else who's come along. But Jenny, you get the last word.
Oh, just that it's been so nice. Thank you very much for inviting me. And I'm definitely going to come along to more of these cafes, and it'd be lovely to hear. Sorry there wasn't much chance for discussion, but it'd be lovely to hear more about what everybody's up to with walking and sound. So we'll see you at another cafe.